for everyone in the room and those online, and thank you for joining this side event, which will focus on efforts of the shipping industry to decarbonize and how this comes out into play from a cradle-to-grave perspective. My name is Lars Robert Pedersen. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of BIMCO, and I'm delighted to moderate what will surely be a fascinating discussion. Ships are indispensable in the fight against climate change. They play a crucial role in the global supply chain, and they will be essential for transporting alternative fuels of the future to where they are needed, as well as keeping the world supplied with food and other vital goods. Additionally, they can provide considerable amount of recyclable material, such as steel, when they end their operational lives. In this side event, we will take you on a journey. This journey will commence at the early stages of a ship's life, starting with its design, progressing through its lifespan while it operates as efficiently as possible, and following it until it reaches the end of its life. The journey will end when the ship is recycled, contributing to the circular economy through the repurposing of its steel. One of the main focuses in the path to decarbonization of our industry is how we implement operational measures to maximize efficiency and reduce emissions. And crucial is that this implementation happens now, and it happens in parallel to near zero and zero carbon fuels of the future being developed on a scale large enough for it to meet the needs. During the first half of the panel, we will hear from speakers on the opportunities for decarbonization that are unique to the North American area, and also some of the challenges. With efforts both underway and emerging for increased collaboration between the North American maritime shipping value chain and the US government, our speakers will introduce us to public-private partnerships, green shipping corridors, and more. In the second half of the session, we will evaluate the current state of play and achievements and discuss the steps needed to enable ship recycling to play a significant role in the circular economy and associated greenhouse gas reductions. This will see us move away from the focus on North America and move towards Asia and the big ship recycling nations. The second half of the session will focus on the opportunities and barriers for end-of-life ships through the process of recycling to contribute to the circular economy, particularly related to the greenhouse gas reductions in developing countries. Speakers will look at clarifying what is needed to unlock the opportunities, from capacity building to regulatory clarity. Input from those in the audience will be sought to discuss what a roadmap might look like. Finally, we will hear from representatives from two of the world's biggest ship owners for their perspectives on the topic. We hope that you will both listen and participate in the discussions, as we have allowed time for Q&A at the end, and thought of our audience, both in the room and online, are welcomed as we seek to develop roadmaps and tangible actions to unlock the potential of shipping to contribute more broadly to global greenhouse gas reductions. Now I would like to introduce our panelists, and with me on stage we have, to my left, Leah Dundon. Leah is Director of the Vanderbilt Climate Change Initiative and Research Assistant Professor in the Vanderbilt University School of Engineering. She is also practicing environmental attorney with the law firm of Beveridge and Diamond PC. Her research focuses on maritime shipping decarbonization and climate change education. Leah completed her PhD through the Center of Environmental Management Studies at Vanderbilt University and is part of a larger research group that focuses on climate change, risk management, assessing the impact of extreme weather on infrastructure adaptation. Next, we have Jennifer States. Jennifer is the Vice President of the Blue Sky Maritime Coalition, a value chain coalition working to accelerate the move to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the North American maritime shipping sector. Jennifer brings 20 years of renewable energy and clean tech experience in the industry, non-profit, government, and research environments. Her focus areas include port and maritime innovation and decarbonization projects, such as electrification and alternative fuels for ships, as well as shoreside renewable energy storage and microgrids. We also have Panos Koutsourakis. Panos is a Vice President, Global Sustainability, American Bureau of Shipping, ABS. He is responsible for driving the ABS sustainability strategy and assisting ship owners and operators with achieving their sustainability goals through industry-leading support and digital solutions. We also have Masahiro Takahashi. Max has worked for NYK Lines for 36 years, including in Los Angeles and Rotterdam. He has been involved in ship recycling since 2002, and NYK announced its green demolition policy in 2008, with much upgrading of that since. As executive officer, he oversees two groups, the decarbonization group and the technical management group, where he looks after ship management, seafaring, and research and development. Lastly, in the room, we have Christopher Fee. Christopher is currently Director of Legislative Affairs and Outreach at Oldendorff Carriers in Germany, and he has been working for the dry bulk owner and operator since 2013. Christopher moved to the company's fleet department in 2015 to establish a green ship desk and is now engaged in Oldendorff Carriers' sustainability and industry engagement activities. He recently joined the board of Liberian Shipowners Council and was on the executive committee of the Clean Shipping Alliance from its inception in 2018, where he resigned as vice chair in 2022. During this session, we will also be joined online by a number of speakers, and we will hear from Gudrun Janssens, John Alonso, and Susan Wingfield. Gudrun is a manager of the Intergovernmental Engagement Team of BIMCO and heads up the BIMCO Brussels office. After having worked at the European Community of Shipowners Associations, EXA, as their Director of Environment and Maritime Safety, she was Head of Environmental and Technical Affairs at the Royal Belgium Shipowners Association in Antwerp. She is responsible for environmental and climate-related shipping files on the European level, such as the reduction of air emissions from shipping, the quality of bunker fuels and its supply chain, the provision of adequate port reception facilities for ship-generated waste, and is an expert in the safe and environmentally sound recycling of ships. John Alonso is a project technical analyst working on the IMO Norway CENSREC program for safe and environmentally sound ship recycling in Bangladesh. John has an academic background in political science, development, and natural resource economics. He has over 10 years' experience in the field of marine biosecurity, the design and implementation of international capacity building projects related to marine environment protection, and providing technical and policy assistance to developing countries. John has extensive experience in capacity building through the IMO's Glow Ballast and Glow Fouling projects, and is now overseeing the implementation of the third phase of the IMO Norway CENSREC program of safe and environmentally sound ship recycling in Bangladesh. Lastly, Susan is a program management officer at the UN Environment Program with 20 years experience in the environment, sustainability and development fields. Susan's role with UNEP's Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions focuses on the implementation and governance aspects of multilateral environmental agreements, chemical and waste policy, facilitation of negotiation processes, such as that for a new treaty to end plastic pollution, and extensive policy and capacity building assistance work on ship recycling. In addition, she is responsible for the human rights and gender portfolios within the Secretariat. Prior to her role at UNEP, Susan performed a variety of project management and consultancy roles within the UN, World Bank, UK government, and finance and IT sectors. So, I hope you will enjoy today's discussion, so let us waste no more time and ask the first question, which I will direct at Leah Dundon. And Leah, as our first speaker, could I ask you to highlight what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities in decarbonization, in decarbonizing the shipping industry in the United States?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thank you all for coming to this session. So one important issue in the industry for North America and in the US in particular is really the diversity in terms of ships, characteristics, and their operational needs. So the solutions are going to have to be really multifaceted. There's truly no one size fits all. There's not going to be one fuel that's adopted across North America that fixes everything. So you have vessels that have to operate really great distances with long ways between refueling and that have almost no limits on weight and size constraints in terms of if there were new vessels. And then you have those that are extremely size and weight constrained, even if money was no object. So the US market in particular has also some other unique characteristics that make decarbonizing difficult. And one thing that we looked at in our research project was whether fleet turnover might actually be something that we could rely on to help decarbonization progress. And we determined that the average age of the US fleet and North American fleet in particular is much longer than the average age of the international fleet. And so we can't really wait for fleet turnover and just have more vessels, new vessels that are low carbon or no carbon. The average age of the global merchant fleet, that's all vessels currently operating, is about 13 years. In the US, that number is 36 years. And part of that is because a large proportion of the US fleet actually operates on inland waterways or the Great Lakes, and so they're not exposed to the corrosive salt that happens in saltwater. The other thing is that in the US there's very stringent safety, operational, and maintenance requirements, and those just make them be they're very well built and very well maintained vessels that last a long time. The other thing is the Jones Act. So we have a particular law in the US that's been around for a very long time that essentially says if you're going to move a vessel from one US port to another US port, that vessel has to be US crewed, US built, and US maintained. So you can imagine the pricing kind of goes up if you have to do all that in the US. So because it's so expensive, the initial investment is really high, and ship owners have got to operate them for a very long time to get that return on investment. And then lastly, diesel engines have very long lifespans. It's almost never economical to replace a fully functioning diesel engine, even if with a new low or no carbon engine. Partly that's because diesel engines are larger and have sturdier parts like gears rather than timing belts or other such things. They operate at lower RPMs, so you have less wear and tear on the engine. So what we found is essentially you're really going to need incentives and subsidies to make this transition in North America for these types of vessels. The U.S. inland waterway is a particular challenge, and we have a whole report just focused on the inland waterway. The U.S. inland waterway can be as shallow as 9 feet. That is what vessels must be able to operate in. And they have to navigate very tortuous river bends, pushing very large tows of barges. There's a series of locks and dams in the U.S. that some of them were built in the early 1900s, and the vessels with their tows must be able to navigate those bends. So again, even if money were no object, you cannot build some of these vessels wider, longer, or so that their depth is increased. So they're very balance and weight constrained. In addition, vessels in the U.S. were built, especially in the inland waterway, were built at a time when fuel was extremely cheap. So they use actually marine diesel as their ballast. So unlike a car that you can drive pretty much till empty and then pull into the gas station, most vessels in the inland waterway for certain, you can drive them to about 50% tank full or 75% tank full. So you're only using a fraction of the amount of gas that you have to put in your entire marine diesel that you fill up your tanks with, because the rest of it is ballast. So that is a really important issue when you're talking about an alternative fuel. Methanol is one that people talk about as a drop-in fuel. It can be used in a lot of existing, with some modifications, engines. But you need a much bigger tank. Methanol has about 39% energy density of marine diesel. So if you have the same infrastructure, you're either going to have to stop and refuel a lot more often, or you're going to have bigger tanks, and bigger tanks is maybe impossible on the inland waterway. So these are just some of the big challenges to decarbonization that are occurring in the U.S. in particular, in North America. One opportunity we did find in our report is that there is one type of vessel that is very uniquely suited to electrifying right now with today's technology, and those are called the fleet boats in the inland river, and they're essentially the parking lot operators. They work close to shore. They don't operate in long geographic distances. They essentially assemble the barges into tows that then the towboats come and take up or down river. And because they stay in geographically stable locations, and they work in about 12-hour shifts, they can be electrified now with today's technology. And we actually worked with a naval architect to help us come up with a tow plan so that you can see sort of some of the diagrams of how you might convert such a boat right now. So in that regard, there's some real challenges to U.S. fleet decarbonization and recycling. If a boat lasts, there were some on the inland river that have been operating nearly 100 years. Many were like 70 and 80 years. So that's an extraordinary length of time. They've been retrofitted, but the essential steel hull is the same. That doesn't bode well for any kind of changeover for the vessels. So it's going to take concerted effort along the entire value chain. And just to sum up, that brings me to my last comment about Blue Sky, which you'll hear from next, Blue Sky Maritime Coalition, for a project for the Maritime Transportation Research and Education Center, MARTREC. This is a US DOT research center that Vanderbilt is a part of. We studied Blue Sky as an example of a value chain coalition working on this problem. And so, kind of like Uber, it seems obvious now that it's here. Value chain coalitions seem really obvious to me now that I've seen them, because we encounter a lot of companies trying to decarbonize within a silo, but if you don't decarbonize the whole system that they're dependent on, you're not going to get there. And so that's why Blue Sky was formed. We're aware of only one other in the auto industry called Katina X. And with that, I will turn it over to Blue Sky.
Thank you, Leah. That was really excellent. And Jennifer, the Blue Sky Mountain Coalition recently published its roadmap to net zero emissions for North American waterway transportation. Could I ask you to summarize the key messages and action points from the roadmap, as well as your view on progress since COP27?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Robert, and to the organizers at BIMCO, Bev, and as well to Vanderbilt, our key partner, Leah Dundon. We really would not be here today at COP without her support. I'm honored to be included among this stellar panel of speakers, and I really look forward to the further discussions in the Q&A. Hopefully we'll leave enough time. As was mentioned, Blue Sky's mission is to accelerate decarbonization of waterborne transportation with a focus on the US and Canada to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. We're an industry-led, member-based consortium with 120 entities across the value chain. This includes ship owner-operators, charterers, technology companies, fueling producers and providers, financial legal entities, plus ports, academic institutions, NGOs, and more. All members provide in-kind support and leadership for our work streams, where we are driving action through collaborative projects. We are a coalition of the willing. Members are actively working together to advance the mission of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're committed to collaboration across all stakeholders within waterborne transportation. We embrace innovation, disruptive thinking, and thinking that challenges the norm. We pursue a pragmatic and systems-based approach, as Leah mentioned, in order to accelerate the impact on emissions. These are the guiding principles that we just laid out in the roadmap to net zero emissions for North American waterborne transportation. With a focus on vision-based action planning, we actually worked across our stakeholders to identify 6 key challenges and associated actions that are needed to accelerate the transition to net zero emissions. So I'll highlight just a few here today, but we will have a press conference on December 11th where Megan will present some more details, and the report is available for free on our website, of course. So challenge number 1, there are built-in maritime system inefficiencies and very siloed approaches. There are multiple bilateral approaches strung together in every single commercial, technical, operational, and even the policy and regulatory interface. So what we need is a systems-based approach to efficiency and, as Leah mentioned, collaborations in order to create new business models, methods, procedures, and practices that work to optimize the system as a whole and that will value maritime emission reductions. To address this challenge, we can enable optimization through digitalization and data-driven approaches. We can work with policy and finance stakeholders in order to design ways to monetize a value chain approach. And through green shipping corridors, we can develop, lead, and drive project implementation through regional efforts that include these systems-based approaches, such as aggregating fuel demand with production. For the green shipping corridors where we're providing leadership, this includes the Gulf of Mexico, Great Lakes, and Pacific Northwest to Alaska. We apply a cluster-based regional approach to our decarbonization initiatives instead of a port-to-port and fuel-only focus, as many other corridors do. Another challenge is the lack of trusted, accurate, and verifiable greenhouse gas emissions inventories specific to North America. We currently don't have an accurate way to understand the magnitude of our emissions in the US and Canada. The IMO calculation methods, such as CII, are inaccurate for the types of vessels and operational services that make up the North American sector, as Leah described in great detail. So to address this challenge, we need a study that's specific to North American waterborne transportation greenhouse gas emissions. We need an emissions collection system for data, and we need to establish common emission methodologies that work for our sector. Also, as Leah mentioned, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution for North America due to the long lifespans, the bespoke designs, and the great variation in operational profiles. So, to address this, we really do need support for the development of pilot and demonstration projects. I do want to praise what the US government has done with our Inflation Reduction Act. They really have incentivized the production of renewable energy, alternative fuels, and carbon capture, but there is a key gap in supporting the uptake of these new technologies, especially for vessels. Another thing we need to do is focus on condition-based approaches for retrofits. The age of the hull is how we currently evaluate ships versus whether they have emission the best tier possible engine emissions. Our fuel and energy infrastructure is also lacking the demand that is really necessary to reach the scale. And another way we can address this is the green shipping corridors, again, by connecting production and demand. We need to aggregate fuel demand at ports along with other multimodal transportation. And we need to form collaboratives across port, utility, and maritime stakeholders so that we can implement the infrastructure projects that are necessary. And finally, there really is a patchwork approach of policy and regulations across all of our different states, different jurisdictions, and different national boundaries. But of course, our fleets are mobile. So this presents a very difficult understanding of the lay of the land around emission reductions. So we suggest developing an approval roadmap for regulatory processes that can help accelerate both production and utilization of emission reduction technologies, both for ships and shoreside, and also developing incentives for uptake of these technologies specifically for port and maritime applications. In conclusion, to accelerate action for emission reductions, we really do need unprecedented levels of collaboration across the entire value chain, as well as public-private partnerships to drive the uptake of these new technologies for emission reduction. Together, we can advance the actions needed to accelerate these emission reductions, but collaboration is key. We want to work with you, and we want to find and implement solutions. Blue Sky is advancing the collaborative constructs that are critical to forming project partnerships and working to make real progress. Please join us. Please share your knowledge or your innovations and ideas, and most importantly, join us to take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now let's turn to ABS and Panos. ABS has recently published a future fuels outlook, updated to consider the revised IMO strategy. Could you elaborate on the content and its conclusions?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think that I have to add a lot. I think both Leah and Jennifer, they covered all the challenges across the board. Apart from this, on an annual basis, we issue our publication, which is a market outlook, and we do the fuels projections, the fuel mix projection. And we tried, to do some more research and having some more practical findings from the study that we did. First of all, we have, let's say, re-engineered the whole model that we have for the fuel projections. The reason that we did that is because we noticed the previous years, let's say, the alternative fuel demand, it was a bit flattened because of the energy security issues. Then we had the COVID, we had many different, let's say, unfortunate conditions in our world. So in the latest model, we incorporated all of these parameters. And also we have the revised strategy from the IMO. So we have the net zero target, which is, with this one, IMO put a completely new dimension on the table. So the net zero is for the first time we have to consider the emissions from the production to the combustion. That is the first time. So among all of this, and moving to the findings, I would say one of the most interesting findings that we have is that we have identified a decarbonization pattern based on the trading commodities. What I mean, depends on the ship type or the cargo each ship is going to transfer. For instance, if it is crude oil, we're expecting the crude oil to decline in the next years. We're expecting transportation of coal to decline. We're expecting, let's say, the steel coils transportation to decline. That means that this part of the existing fleet is not going to have a turnover. You know, we're not expecting to have a fleet renewal. So they're going to invest more on the existing technologies in order to improve the energy efficiency because of this. So it depends from other types. If we see other types of ships, like container ships, we're expecting higher turnover, higher fleet renewal rates, because we see more and more demand for containerized cargoes. I think this is among the main findings. Now, apart from this, on the fuel projection side, fossil fuels were not expecting to be disappeared by 2050. There is going to be a steep decline, around 70%, but will not be disappeared. At the same time, these fuels, we need to make sure that there will be sufficient supply of lower or zero carbon fuels in order, let's say, to follow all of this decarbonization pathway. Also, in line with this, the energy demand for shipping will be increased. That will be increased something in between 30 to 40% by 2050. Again, alternative fuels are very important. Now, we did some scenarios to see what it needs in order for the fleet, the global fleet, to reach the decarbonization, to meet the decarbonization target, which is the net zero approach. That needs an aggregated, let's say, energy efficiency of 15%. So we need to improve the global energy efficiency of the ships by 15%. We need to reduce the carbon emissions, and that is going to happen with carbon capture. So carbon capture is going to be a very important technology for the future. Of course, we know all the challenges, infrastructure, maturity of the technology, etc. But apart from this, carbon capture is going to be very important. And also, part of this equation is the electrolyzers for us. Electrolyzers because of the hydrogen production, which is going to be, the missing piece of the puzzle of the green fuels. Now, most recently, we have seen electrolyzers reaching up to 70% of efficiency, but we see, more and more companies coming and research coming up with electrolyzers 90%. This additional 20% is not about the technology, it's about to reducing the cost of producing the hydrogen today, and consequently reducing the cost of zero carbon fuels or hydrogen-based fuels, in the short to mid-term.
Thank you, Panos. Really interesting perspectives on the effect of the IMO strategy and how this will pan out. So now we will move to the first of our online participants, Gudrun Janssen and Gudrun. Could you tell us a little bit about why is it really that we need to discuss ship recycling in the context of COP, and what has this to do with greenhouse gas emissions reductions? Gudrun, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Robert. I hope everyone can understand me well.
We hear you.
Okay, great. So I'll do my best to explain how shipping and ship recycling and steel recycling can contribute to considerable greenhouse gas emission reduction, and at the same time, how it can be a little piece in the chain supporting the circular economy. I do have a major echo. I don't know if that can be solved because it is a bit, I'm just gonna check my settings if it's at my end. Okay, it's better now. I hope everyone can still hear me now. Can someone confirm if the slideshow is on, or?
We on the first slide.
Is it just? Yeah. Okay, I can take it from here. Thank you very much. Because actually, before diving deeper into our roadmap on how these greenhouse gas emission reductions can be achieved, as well as the circular economy supported, there's three things I would like to explain first, because these three elements are needed to, are crucial even in understanding shipping and ship recycling in general. So first, shipping is global, and therefore it needs a global regulatory framework. This slide, just keep it on for a little while, just shows how shipping is scattered around the world, with shipbuilding, ownership, registration, and ship recycling taking part in many different regions throughout the globe. And then you see the purple indicates where recycling is mainly taking place, which is South Asia, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Next slide, please. So a global industry requires a global framework, and we have the Hong Kong Convention coming into force in 2025. And it will apply during a ship's entire lifespan, which is good because it will allow, or it could ultimately allow, for a good end-to-end greenhouse gas accountability. It will set one global standard for shipping and the ship recycling industry, and to unlock its full potential, it will party states to the convention and to the Basel Convention and ILO Convention will need to figure out how all these UN conventions can coexist and reinforce each other. Next slide, please. So second thing to bear in mind is that the demand for future ship recycling capacity will only increase. So between 2013 and 2022, we had, yes, keep on this slide, please. We had around, expressed in ships, we had around 7,500 ships going for recycling. The next 10 years, that amount will double. So we expect more or less 15,000 ships to be recycled. And those are ships, which you will see in the left-hand graph. Those are ships that are built during the year 2000s. They are the main source for recycling for the coming decade. And if you would add another 10 years, so 20 years from now, you will see that it will be the ships built in the years 2010 that will be the source for recycling within 20 years from now. And that increase is very steep at the ship delivery side. So it will add up with another 65%. So that is likely to lead to even higher levels of recycling. Next slide, please. And it also, to complete the exercise, we also had a look at if this could be confirmed by the age at which vessels are being recycled. And it is the average age of vessels between 2016 and 2020, vessels going for recycling grew from 23 years to actually almost 28 years old. And especially if you have a look at different segments for container vessels, we see that the container fleet has its highest average age this year, actually, which is 14.2 years. And it was the highest average so far. Next slide, please. The third thing to be aware of is what we took into account when developing our roadmap was that we were very aware of the future obligation for ship owners. So obligations coming up or we believe to be key in the coming decades. First is the IHM. It stands for Inventory of Hazardous Materials. It's actually an inventory that needs to be developed, and especially now that Pakistan has ratified the convention just last week, ships will soon need to have an inventory on board, which basically indicates if and where and how many hazardous materials are on board the vessel. It can be in the ship's machinery, it can be in the structure or in the hull. That all needs to be, information all needs to be included in the inventory and verified by a verifier. Second, future obligation for ship owners, which we consider to be key, is ESG reporting. There is clearly a global call for increased transparency. We see in Europe initiatives being taken on due diligence, more ESG reporting in the US. We believe that to be very important also, and it will also reflect on the shipping industry and ship recycling. Next slide, please. So we had to take, or we felt like we had to take these three elements into account when developing our roadmap, a roadmap that focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and supports the circularity. So those elements were, to recall, shipping is global, needs a global framework. We know that the demand for sustainable ship recycling is going to increase following the aging of the fleet and the greening of the fleet, of course. And the third element is that we have to consider the times we live in. There's a global call for increased transparency, ESG reporting, better traceability, and the ships should be built already today in accordance with the Hong Kong Convention, meaning an IHM or an inventory needs to be on board. Next slide, please. So bearing these issues in mind and looking at the possible greenhouse gas reductions, we distinguish two parts in the process. So first is the recycling part. On the graph, you see that when it comes to recycling, the biggest chunk of the emission is actually taking place in the steel recycling process. So it can account to up to 95% of the emissions, while the emissions coming from the yard, coming from the dismantling process, the cutting and the transportation only accounts for 5%. So improving your steel recycling processes will clearly improve your greenhouse gas emission reductions. And in addition, by using recycled steel obtained from the ship recycling, that will give a lower carbon footprint compared to using steel which is produced from virgin materials like iron ore. So it is an attractive choice for industries that are clearly aiming as well to reduce their overall carbon emissions. Ship recycling can contribute to the development of a market for green steel, but we should bear in mind that steel should be considered at the recycling and at the design and construction phase to lower the overall greenhouse gas emissions of the ship. So next slide, please. So if you move to the second part, which is the greenhouse gas reductions on the design and the construction phase, you see, well, the data we have here is coming from an example ship. It's from one of our members. It's a ro-ro vessel. So and bearing in mind a bit the time, I would like you to remember from this slide that in this case, the production, shipbuilding, maintenance part of a ship's lifespan, in this case, the steel is actually responsible for over 70% of the emissions. In this specific case, for this vessel, it was 66,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Second thing to remember is that we also, as I explained in the previous slides, we also know that steel takes up a big chunk of the emissions while the ship is at end of life. In this case, it accounted up till 85% of the CO2 of the greenhouse gas emissions. So circularity, using green or low carbon steel when producing next generation vessels will, with a low climate impact, will be key. And ship owners rightfully see LCA on production, maintenance and recycling as an upcoming competitive parameter. Next slide, please. Summarizing, by using low emission steel for new buildings, overall environmental impact can be lowered. Several organizations and initiatives are already striving for net zero steel production, like the Steel Zero and the Sustainable Shipping Initiative. And it's important to create a system around this low emission steel using circularity around ship recycling and shipbuilding. building, of course. Next slide, please. So this slide, it's a graph. It indicates a bit the steel recycling system, steel produced and used by shipbuilding, and then it's used during a ship's lifespan, of course, while transporting goods, and then end of life, the steel can be through re-rolling mills or melting plants, can be fed into the product chain, in fact, so replacing virgin materials or steel produced from iron ore. Next slide, please. Yeah, so coming to our conclusions and the element of our roadmap, we need a clear legal framework to unlock the full potential of the IMO Hong Kong Convention, and for this we need obviously support from other relevant conventions that apply to ship recycling specifically. We also are in need of a trustworthy certification scheme for the low carbon green steel. And we think it's advisable to have green steel and possibly other valuable metals included in an inventory of materials, not necessarily the existing inventory of hazardous materials, but inventory of materials, because there's different grades of steel also coming from the ship recycling process. So to allow upcycling rather than downcycling, this is recommendable. And last but not least, we are considering amending the Hong Kong Convention, or better said, its guidelines. We feel we could focus maybe a bit more on circularity, because by increased traceability, you can allow a better greenhouse gas accounting, end-of-end accounting, actually. So monitoring your greenhouse gases. Next slide. I think this takes me to the end of my presentation. Yes, over to you, Robert.
For taking us through the important basics of ship recycling and pointing out that several things needs to be done, not least also that the recycling is done in an environmentally safe manner. And for this, let's turn to the second online participants today, John and Alonso. And John, in the previous presentation, the concept of a roadmap was introduced. One of the key aspects would be capacity building in recycling states, many of which are extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I would like to ask you a two-point question. Firstly, how does the work of the IMO contribute to this capacity building now? And secondly, how do you see the future? How can we ensure a just transition for workers in these countries and balance other SDGs such as gender equality? Over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Can you hear me? Yes. Before I reply, thanks for inviting IMO to participate in this event. So IMO has been providing technical cooperation and capacity building activities in quite a number of developing countries, basically to inform and support the accession to the Hong Kong Convention. We typically start this process with regional or national workshops that aim at raising awareness about the existence of the convention and take stock of the needs of our member states. Yeah, obviously, our goal is to prepare countries to accede to the convention and be ready to implement it. Briefly mentioned before, so the requirements for the entry into force of the Hong Kong Conventions were finally achieved earlier this year after the accession of Bangladesh and Liberia, which means that the convention will come into force in June 2025. And now we are starting to detect a kind of urgency from all other countries to be ready for that deadline. But how do we do this? So our more in-depth or sustained efforts come through project-based interventions, where we instigate a legal policy and institutional reform. The best example is a current project funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is Koutsourakis, as you mentioned. We launched this in 2015, and we are right now implementing its third phase. Throughout the project, IMO has helped bring together national stakeholders into an interministerial task force or national task force that governs the work of the project and provides strategic guidance for the development of all the products that are developed by the project. We have provided technical support on numerous aspects at all levels, and we have helped draft national regulations and norms and guided their implementation. Right now, as I said, we are in the third phase of this Sensorec project in Bangladesh, and we are focusing on supporting the government in the build and setup of a treatment, storage and disposal facility, which is essential for the environmentally safe downstream management of hazardous waste. I believe Susan, my colleague from UNEP, may explain in more detail why this type of installations are needed. But basically, IMO's intervention provided a preliminary design and feasibility study that have helped to secure the funding from the government of Japan to build and provide technical expertise that will make this facility a reality. Another important aspect is the need to support the industry in the adoption of best practices and upgrading their facilities to achieve certification under the Hong Kong Convention. This may be very obvious, but many times is not forgotten. It's forgotten. So it is the industry who needs to comply with the requirements. So it is quite important to have them on board and ensure that their concerns and needs are taken into account, because they are sometimes very specific and not always covered by international treaties. There are currently over 160 registered ship recycling facilities in Bangladesh, out of which approximately about 50 are active. Right now, only 7 have achieved or are about to achieve certification. So aside from the technical support, the greatest need of the industry is identifying and securing funding for upgrading their practices and their installations. From IMO's perspective, the first sort of type of support we have given is commission the development of a scoping study on the investment needs of the industry, future perspectives, and what funding modalities would be adequate to the different types of enterprises. We are also providing basic business skills to shipyard managers to develop and present suitable business proposals. And all this will sort of come together in opportunities that we'll create to catalyze investment. So maybe sort of getting the industry to meet the investment community and present those proposals that can secure the funding that they need. On the second question about just transition and how we are helping contribute to gender equality. So ensuring occupational safety in the ship recycling operations is one of the key elements of the Hong Kong Convention. In the case of Bangladesh, we were very aware that every year a significant number of fatal accidents were happening in the ship recycling industry, and they're causing severe deaths, several deaths and severe injuries. Common wrongdoings cause the most fatal accidents. So awareness raising of ship recycling workers, supervisors, and other technical staff on common causes of accidents and required measures to combat them will help to improve occupational safety and prevent accidents. Through the Sensorec program in Bangladesh, IMO launched a Train the Trainer program that has capacitated over 700 people on different aspects related to this occupational safety. The training was adapted to different types, different profiles of workers. And we are now making sure that this effort continues in the future through a national training institution that will continue to provide the training, including regular updates and certification of all the workers. In addition to this, we have continuously worked with or collaborated with the International Labour Organization to ensure that other aspects are integrated, such as labor laws and standards, wages and working conditions, and recognizing good industry practices and to integrate as well worker unions. That's a key aspect that we're starting to assess. A different aspect, and this is my last part, is integrated women into the industry. So in Bangladesh, at this stage, there are absolutely no women in the industry. This is because there is currently a law that forbids entry of women into the ship recycling facilities. So IMO last year, in collaboration with some of the ministries, have worked to modify the situation, and we're hoping to see very soon the approval of an amendment to the law. In parallel, we are working to raise awareness among women about the opportunities that exist in this industry. We firmly believe that there are going to be greater development opportunities of this industry in the future, and women have many transferable skills from other industries that can be adequate for participating and working in the ship recycling industry, particularly at the management level. So we're using role models, women from other countries that are participating in the ship recycling industry. We have developed some awareness raising materials, and we will soon run a careers fair to more than anything to convince women from other sectors to participate in the ship recycling industry. So I hope this gives you a good insight into the capacity building work conducted from IMO. Basically, our support is provided through project-based interventions and that are focused on supporting a legal policy and institutional reform. And then sort of we help capacitate all the people involved. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Very, very interesting perspectives, and also some of the more, what you say, hidden issues that we not normally hear about. But you mentioned the downstream waste management, and now let's turn to our last online speaker, Susan Wingfield from the UNEP's Basel Secretariat. And Susan, the issue of downstream waste management has been identified as being important. The Basel Convention, of course, provides a framework for this management. Could you explain a little of how this works and what it seeks to achieve, and then elaborate on how the Basel framework can ultimately contribute to a circular economy?
Thank you very much. Just checking that you can hear me in the room. I could hear myself.
Yes, so we can hear you.
Sort out that echo. I think we have. Wonderful. Okay. So thank you, first of all, to the organizers, BIMCO, and the co-sponsors of the event today. Sorry, I can still hear my voice. Perhaps there's a setting that can be adjusted. There we go. Thank you. So it's lovely to be here, and I'm very happy to expand on the Basel Convention, which falls under the auspices of the UN Environment Programme, its application to ship recycling, and also its contribution to a circular economy. Could I have the slide on global agreements for sound? There we are. Thank you so much. So, similar to, for example, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Basel Convention is a multilateral environmental agreement. This agreement provides a regulatory framework that helps prevent environmental and health risks associated with both movement and disposal of hazardous waste. So it covers everyday waste, for example, plastics, and also waste electronic and electrical items, through to end-of-life ships, for example. Now, it's one of a number of global agreements you'll see here on the screen dealing with the management of chemicals and waste. I won't go into them in detail, only to say that there is quite a wide net of both mandatory and voluntary instruments that regulate this particular sector. Next slide, please. So the Basel Convention is particularly applicable to the issue at hand today, which is ship recycling. Its main objective is protecting human health and the environment from the adverse effects of hazardous waste. To do so, it really focuses on three pillars. Not only the prevention and minimization of waste or hazardous waste, but also its environmentally sound management. I'll highlight more what this means in my next slides. And then whenever a trade or a transboundary movement of hazardous waste or other waste occurs, it's done through a notification and consent procedure under the convention. Next slide, please. So that's really the scope of the Basel Convention, as I said, looking at the management of hazardous waste and its the control of its transboundary movement. I'll take a bit of time now to explain how it contributes to a circular economy for end-of-life ships. Before I do that, let's quickly revisit the facts, which I think Gudrun has already highlighted very nicely. First of all, next 10 years, we're looking at up to 15,000 ships going for recycling. And this is monumental considering this is double the amount of the previous 10 years. Now, we know that the steel industry is one of the largest industrial sources for CO2 emissions, due of course, to its heavy reliance on carbon-intensive processes. Ship recycling, as a huge recycling effort that it is, can support a circular economy through the production of recycled steel, or, as Gudrun has referred to it, green steel. Now, production of recycled steel is, of course, more cost-effective than new steel production and requires less energy and resources. It's important to note that when ships are dismantled for recycling, most of the ship is actually recycled and reused. So for a ship, for example, in India, I've heard estimates as high as 97% of the ship being recycled. This means not only the steel, of course, but everything else, equipment, furniture, and so forth, even the light boats. So it is a great recycling and reuse effort. So you could see ship recycling as quite a major win, really, as a contributor to net zero through this green or recycled steel production, promotion of material efficiency and reuse. And in addition to that, of course, it's also a very good supply of steel to those where the ship recycling industry is based for construction and other purposes, on top of being a very large employer. So the Basel Convention supports this process in a number of ways. Well, the convention itself is near universal, and it has 191 parties, and in signing up, these parties have committed to all of its provisions. So this includes management of hazardous waste that is identified in the convention, so in the annexes to the convention itself. Also those waste that exhibit certain types of characteristics, and those identified under national legislation. So a number of these hazardous materials can be found on ships, and as Gudrun mentioned, hazardous materials used in ships need to be considered at the design and construction phase, as they'll ultimately become hazardous waste that needs to be dealt with. The convention also sets out the provision on environmentally sound management. As one of the central provisions of the convention, ESM is elaborated through technical guidelines. These are available, for example, on different waste treatment and disposal technologies, including recycling and reuse, also for specific waste streams, such as end-of-life ships. So this guidance not only offers methods and disposal routes for those parts of the ships that cannot be recycled, certainly for those parts of the ship that should not be recycled. It's important that materials such as asbestos, heavy metals, certain toxic coats, paints and coatings, persistent organic pollutants and so forth are not recycled and are safely managed in a downstream waste management facility. And to that end, I'm pleased to say that we collaborated closely with IMO in the development of the requirements for the TSDF that John referred to, that Japan is very kindly going to be funding in the upcoming period. So really, talking about all of these hazards, what is essential if we're going to achieve a circular economy for end-of-life ships is removal of the hazards from the recycling chain so that we can achieve what is known as a non-toxic circular economy. Additionally, the convention has a prior informed consent procedure. I mentioned a system of notification and consents. This is really meant to ensure that any country importing waste knows what they're importing and has consented to its import. So this process of transparency through the waste trade was designed to promote both transparency and environmentally sound recycling and disposal practices. Could I go to the next slide, please? Having said that, those familiar with the industry know there have been some issues, particularly due to the nature of the maritime industry, in applying the Basel Convention consent procedure to ships going for recycling. And for this reason, parties to the convention invited IMO a number of years ago, we're going back 20 or so years, to develop a legally binding instrument on recycling of ships. And what's resulted is the Hong Kong Convention. And of course, this aims to provide through, as Gudrun and John have briefly touched upon, through a framework for transparency and accountability means for the environmentally sound recycling of ships. This framework, together with the Basel Convention's framework on ESM, particularly for the hazardous waste management, hold a great deal of complementarity, although there are some that contend that there are some areas requiring clarification for the instruments to effectively coexist. So it remains to be seen, as John and Gudrun have mentioned, we've got the Hong Kong entry into force in June 2025. As I said already, there is great complementarity between the instruments. Whether or not governments decide to take additional steps to enhance the complementarity in terms of the transboundary trade remains to be seen, but watch this space. What is clear is that both conventions have a great role to play on the subject of ship recycling and thus in reduction of overall global carbon emissions and promoting reuse and resource efficiency through a circular economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. That was really an excellent presentation of some of the challenges and what we need to be done in relation to the Basel Convention and what it all really means. So now let's turn to back to the room to our two ship owner representatives. The first one, Max Takahashi-san from NYK. And Max, some of the improvements in ship recycling yards in Asia, which have been long represented by bad press and reputations that have been highlighted. As a ship owner currently using those yards, can you describe some of the improvements you have seen? And secondly, what further improvements would you like to see?
Okay, thank you very much, Ross. As I think that for the many people, there's no opportunity to go to India or to Bangladesh to see how the demolition it works. So that I want to show you some slides to share what's going on, how it's improved. So can you show the slide, please? Next, please. Yeah, this is just similar, the statistics that about half of the demolition of the ships are in Bangladesh and then India and Pakistan, and all these three countries consisted of the, that 80%, more than 80% of the capacity. So without them, and so that the ship's recycling is not workable. Next slide, please. So that this is a competition of the different kind of ships that recycled in those countries, Bangladesh and the others. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So I myself, as introduced by Lars Roberts, that I myself started to for the green demolition things in my company back in 2002. Around that time, that of course I am in IMO, that discussion has already started. Then that the Hong Kong Convention was adopted in 2009. And prior to that, NYK Line has announced green demolition policies. Then for that preparing work that we have sent many technical peoples to visit many ship recycling yards in China and the Indian subcontinent. But at that time, that only several yards in China had the quality of the satisfaction, and so no satisfactory demolition yard in India. But anyway, that Hong Kong Convention was adopted in 2009. Since then, that the Japanese government and the Japan Shipowners Association and the Class NK, they jointly worked especially to India, to grow their capacity, to improve their quality to the Hong Kong Convention level. Then that JSA, Japan Shipowners Association, has visited China and India and so on, to encourage them to upgrade their quality to Hong Kong Convention level so that they can have a Japanese ship for demolition. And then finally, as we all know, that by the ratification of Bangladesh and Liberia, that finally Hong Kong Convention is going to be in effect in 2025. Next slide, please. So I want to show you one case that we have sent one vessel to a yard in Bangladesh named PHP. And then later I will show you time-lapse videos to shorten the period of the demolition to 3 minutes. And so that yard is certificated by Class NK in 2020. And we have sent people, our technical guys, to overseas, not just simply believe the certification of Class NK. Our protocol is always to send people to check if that is okay or not. And so then we always then we give the approval as MYK approved yards to the old yards in India or in Bangladesh or wherever it is. Then when we sell our ships to the cash buyers, we always have a NYK special form that the ship, so the intermediator, that the cash buyer, have to demolish a yard from at the yard on the list. Otherwise, the sale of the contract is to be a breach of the contract. So then we wanted to encourage the Bangladesh to ratify the convention so that we want to send our ships to show our respect for their upgrade work. So next slide, please. So now that there is no yard listed in EU, the ship recycling regulation from the Indian subcontinent, because that the ordinary method is a beaching style. But that I want to show you that even that beaching style, that the good recycling yard can demolish in a very environmentally friendly and safe way. And this is a photo taken by our superintendent from the day of the beaching. That every day that our superintendents and the yards jointly they're having a safety meeting every day, and so that please go ahead. Yeah, so that that the yard is very much organized and clean. The next slide, please. Yeah, so that the like that it very well organized. No darts, no garbage anywhere. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that they also care about the human rights, and so that whatever the things found or that suggestion from the workers, that the owners of the yards always listen from the suggestion box or so, and they also have a nice, of course not it's a luxury hotel, but it's a healthy, that the food is served, and they have also the accommodation. Next slide, please. Right, like that, workers' accommodation, bankside beds, and also that the hospital nearby and emergency exit and so on. They repeat. They have the emergency, training all the time. And next slide, please. But not all the yards in the Bangladesh is still to that level. This is a photo taken at the nearby recycling yard in Bangladesh. Tidal area is not paved, and oil spillage can be found on the water, and like that, some are still like dumped on the ground and so on, so that not every yard are the same at this moment. But not just saying that because there is a bad yard, so that all the countries are bad or so on. That we have to encourage them to improve themselves, because the convention is already ratified. And so that we have to that the rule is going into effect in 2025, so that the yards who do not reach to that level of the Hong Kong Convention will lose the business at all. So next slide, please. Next, I want to show you a 3-minute video. It's a compacted video of all the demolition process. So that the name of our vessel is Carmo. Yep. None of the cut parts was touched to the tidal area by using these cranes. Very organized way to cut the ships to parts. And this ship is a special ship, heavy lift ship, so that they have a crane, so that the ship's crane is also used to transfer the cut block to the shore side. And suddenly that the other ships appeared next to my ship. Then at the end, we celebrate the completion of the work together. One more condition that we added in our contract of sale of our ships to the yard is that they have to accept our superintendents to observe the work and having the meetings to exchange a view. That they are professional of the demolition. We are not, but we send a specialist, a professional for the ships. And so exchange the view through the work. We always have something, new findings, so that we can upgrade our knowledge, their knowledge to improve the safety of the work. So human rights, the safety of the workers, and environmental things for the ocean, that these are two major concerns of us. And I worked for that for 20 years, and I'm very happy that the Hong Kong Convention is finally going to effect in 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. Excellent, very good little piece of video to show how it's really done, because most people don't really know that. Now let's turn to our last speaker, and to conclude the event, I would like to pass the floor to Christopher Fee to provide a broad perspective of a ship owner and hopefully join up some of the threats that we have heard about today. Christopher, can you provide some examples as what you are doing to both support the world in addressing climate change and also the actions you're taking in your own operations? What would you like to see the industry talking about at COP29?
Thank you, Lars Robert. Well, the shipping industry is playing an indispensable role in the journey to renewable energy and a decarbonized future. I'll give you a few examples. So, we're transporting, at least in dry bulk, we're transporting a lot of copper. This is normally mined in faraway regions, for example, Chile, and transported over the oceans to places like China and the United States and Europe for producing batteries for electric vehicles. Iron ore, right? 89%, up to 89% of a wind turbine is made of steel. Right? Steel requires iron ore. Iron ore comes from places like Brazil and Australia and transported to big steel-making countries such as China and Japan and South Korea. And then, we're transporting a lot of wind turbine components for the onshore wind farms. Last but not least, we're also transporting a lot of scrap metal. More than 1 million tons per year of scrap metal is transported on our vessels. And we'll like to see more of that scrap metal going into green steel production and hopefully finding its way back into the construction of vessels, if it's marine grade. So that's just a few examples of how we as ship owners are playing a crucial role in the decarbonization efforts. We're a ship owner and operator. We're not an energy company. We're not a engine manufacturer. So there's not much we can do there. But what we can do is there's a lot of low-hanging fruits on how which we can grasp to decarbonize our own ships, to reduce the emissions or improve the energy efficiency and reduce the emissions on our own vessels. I'll give you a few examples. So in the last 10 years, we've invested more than $4 billion in over 100 eco vessels, eco bulk carriers, with ultra long stroke energy efficient engines, optimized hull shapes, LED lights, and emission abatement technology installed. We've done that in the last 10 years. For the last 2.5 years, we've been trialing second generation, so advanced biofuels, culminating in last week, in fact, it was announced with one of our large clients in Brazil, the first long-distance voyage on a Newcastle Max, which is a large Cape-sized vessel from Brazil to Asia, using a biofuel blend of 24% biofuel. Small steps, but we are making those investments. We are collaborating with our clients. Our clients are interested in reducing their Scope 3 emissions, and we're there to help them, whether it's sitting down together and coming up with innovative ideas such as green contract of affreightments, or simply just working together and running a voyage on biofuels. Then we've invested heavily in transshipment. So we have 10 or 11 transshipment operations globally in strategic locations around the world. And this allows our clients to utilize larger vessels in the supply chain, so reducing overall supply chain emissions for our Arabian Gulf activities. Our clients are able to reduce their supply chain emissions by up to 31%. So these are all relatively low-hanging fruit. It takes some effort, but it's all doable, and it's all these incremental contributions that help. And yeah, what would I like to see from COP29? Well, one thing I would like to see is a stronger focus on the Just Transition Initiative, ensuring that seafarers receive the upskilling required and the competencies required to operate these new vessels and these new fuels and energy-saving devices in a safe manner. And I emphasize the word safe because there's a lot of talks about ammonia, for example. It's highly toxic. So it's imperative that our crew receive the right type of training to handle these fuels. And as stressed when I was an audience member in the previous panel discussion, is to promote our industry to women more. As mentioned, about only 2% of seafarers are females, and something needs to be done about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And this kind of finishes our round of introductions by the various panelists, and I'd like to open the floor to the audience for any burning and turning questions you may have, and there's one here. I believe we have a microphone. It is coming, I think. The online cannot hear you without the microphone, so we need that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much. My name is Captain Bahal. I'm a master mariner. I work for ICSER, which is engaged with cultivating seaweed for carbon capture and value addition products. I have a question for Masahiro-san. Sir, thank you for the lovely presentation. I have beached vessels all over the world, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, when I was in command. One of the problems I noticed was that even though the shipyard, the ship-breaking yard itself was ready with the Hong Kong Convention requirements, downstream governments were not ready with the reception facilities. What's your experience now, and what are you doing about this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. And so that it is not, just by one company, NYK, it is very difficult to solve. But we worked with the Japanese government, and the Japanese government is try to help and subsidize, some money for the improvement and so on. By the mechanism so-called Japanese ODA, the Overseas Development Aid, and for the Aran area, then the money goes to Bangladesh, and so on. And just after the Bangladesh ratification, now the Pakistan is come to Japan to help for the improvement, and so that we are trying to share our knowledge and try to help one by one. to improve that that the individual yard needs to upgrade, but also that for the downstream, the waste management, the Japanese government is, of course, within a limited budget, they are giving the priority to improve the situation.
Thank you, Max. And I believe there's a question here.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. My name's Gavin Allwright. I'm the Secretary General of the International Windship Association. My question's not really related to wind propulsion, but my father-in-law was actually a shipbreaker about a decade ago, and I visited the Bangladesh yards over there. That is amazing. I mean, that is a complete transformation. I'm really impressed by that. I was just wondering, and this is probably a question for everybody on the panel, this circular economy, are we starting to see the lessons that we're learning from the breaking and the end of life dealing of the ships coming back into the original designs of new ships? So, for example, more modularization. For example, we've got toxic fuels coming in. Having a more modular sort of capsule approach for those fuels would make the braking cycle much easier and also much safer. So I'm just wondering, are we starting to see that coming into the design process, a more modular approach or other ramifications? Thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, please.
I can jump in a little bit on that. I would say I'm seeing some modularity around trying to get to scale and efficiency in terms of ship design. And the other thing I've seen is ship design with retrofit in mind. So that you have the ability to go on a tug and be able to do an engine replacement much easier. And so that upfront design that is a little, thinking forward on flexible fuel and that type of thing. I don't know that I could say for ship recycling itself, but I'm seeing modularity that might enable ship recycling in the end that is starting to be in some of the advanced designs. I do think the other thing we need to be thinking about is advanced materials. I'm starting to see carbon fiber and composites and other things in advanced materials in ship design that we also need to make sure we have the recycling side dealt with. And I know it's a key issue for the automotive industry in trying to figure out how to do carbon fiber recycling. Those modular molded designs can help with moving forward, but we have to think about that recycling of other materials as well.
Sorry for interruption,
thanks,
but
Jennifer.
you have only 2 minutes.
Yeah, we are fully aware, and I was just about to say that if there are more comments from the panel, it's a very short comment of about 35 seconds, because I need to wrap this up, because we are on a countdown here.
Okay. Just quickly to your question, that now that you see that the ship recycling country and the ship building country are completely different, so that that for the ship demolition recycling country, they are making they are making steel for their own purposes.
Thanks, Max, and thank you for the questions so far. And it's time to wrap up. And may I firstly thank our speakers and panelists for providing us with such informative comments and observations. To Susan, John, and Gudrun online, and to Christopher, Max, Panos, Jennifer, and Leah in the room. Thank you very much, and let's give them a round of applause. Who have been attending this side event. There's no doubt of the scale of challenge ahead of us while we seek to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Everyone attending this COP and across the globe will have a role to play. The shipping industry is not shy of taking on the challenge of both decarbonization and finding our place in the circular economy. And now we need to apply the lessons we have learned and insights gained today, and we need to move forward. We would encourage any interested parties to keep in touch with us. So please and thank you very much for coming today.